all intended to enrich the knowledge and to provide new insight to students and academics in Untirta in particular, and public in general, with topic on research in social sciences. This program is divided into 5 series: systematic review, research, the first series, and then corpus-based research, digital literacy in social science, and narrative inquiry, and the last is photo voice in social science research. Today, we have Dr. Erin Early to share with us about systematic review research, and Dr. Siti Soeharsi will lead the sessions. Ibu Siti Soeharsi.
Thank you, Ibu Dina Rahmawati. Good morning, Dr. Erin.
Good morning.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Okay, yes, fine too. I think this is not our first meeting, right?
Yeah.
You still remember you had ever visited online?
Yeah.
This department students. Okay, yeah. So this is our second meeting. Thank you and good afternoon, all of the audiences and participants. Okay, I'm glad to see you here, and we are gonna have 2 hours discussion and also meeting with Dr. Erin. But first of all, I would like to ask you whether you are going to be called Erin or Early.
Erin is great, thank you.
Okay, yes, Erin. Yeah, okay. I would like to read in a brief your CV, Erin. It is very interesting.
Thank you.
And many experiences, yeah. Okay, yeah. The audience, our participants, our speaker is a researcher and teacher as well, who took her master in 2016 and also PhD in 2020 in Queen's University Belfast. Right now, Erin Early is a research assistant in University College London and a research assistant in Queen University Belfast. So yes, he is a very true researcher.
Ini yang saya.
Okay, and then she is also joining in Educational Research Officer in Northern Ireland Assembly, and also she is as a reviewer for manuscripts, including current Psychology and also International Journal of Educational Research and Review of Education. Wow. Okay. Our speaker's teaching experience is as a guest lecturer and teaching assistant in Queen's University Belfast, and also she is one of our invited speaker last year. Okay, and one again in Universitas Mataram. So the 2 universities from Indonesia, right, Erin?
Yeah, okay. That's correct. Yeah.
Yes. And if I read your CV, I think most of your publication and writings really concern using this method that you are going to deliver to us. That's systematic review. Okay. Yeah. So link back to the topic of our short course today and tomorrow. So we have 2 days, Erin, together. Okay. So you will talk much about systematic review research. And I'm sure that what you will describe and also present, most of them taken from your experience conducting in the research using that method. Yeah. And talking about this kind of method, I guess this is not the new one, if I'm not mistaken, but not everyone of us really concerned or understand or has applied this method. So with you, we hope you can bring us to the comprehension, understanding of this method by outlining this method. So the first crucial question, why we need systematic review? Okay. Yes, okay, the honorable audience, let me invite Dr. Erin Early. So please, Erin, time is yours.
Thank you so much. That's lovely. Thank you for the introduction. I'm going to attempt to share my screen with my presentation. So can you all see that okay? Yeah, okay, perfect. So thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you so much for having me today and tomorrow. As has been said, my name is Erin Early. I completed my PhD at Queen's University just last year. I worked as a research assistant there, and I've just recently moved to University College London on a research project there, which is a systematic review in education. So I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for having me. And what I really hope to do over these 2 days, so today and tomorrow, is to introduce you to systematic reviews in education research and more widely social sciences. So today I'm going to look at why do we conduct systematic reviews, what are the steps that we go through to conduct systematic reviews, and then have a bit of a discussion about where you think systematic reviews are needed, and answer any questions that you have. I've left some time at the end so we can have a fruitful discussion about that, because I know when you haven't maybe used this method before, or you're new to this method, it's a lot of information to take on in one seminar. So I'm happy to answer any questions or have a discussion at the end. For tomorrow's seminar, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a practical example of a systematic review, so a peer-reviewed journal article that was conducted with some colleagues of mine. And I'm going to take that article and look step by step how we conducted it. Okay, so from the steps that I outlined today, I'm going to then provide the practical example tomorrow for you all, so that it's clear what steps you need to follow. So I hope that sounds okay. I'm going to get started. If there's any questions or anything, please feel free to stop me at any point throughout the presentation. I've also scheduled maybe a 5-minute break at some point, just to break up the information, because there is a lot there. So I hope that's okay too. So let's see. So as I said, today I'm just going to provide an overview of each step that we need to conduct a systematic review in the social sciences and education. So one of the key questions that we need to start with is, what is a systematic review? So Higgins and Green in 2011 stated that a systematic review attempts to collate all empirical evidence that fits pre-specified eligibility criteria in order to answer a specific research question. It uses explicit systematic methods that are selected with a view to minimize bias, thus providing more reliable evidence and findings from which conclusions can be drawn and decisions made. So that's a really good definition of what a systematic review is. Okay, it tries to collate all empirical evidence on a topic, and it uses a specified eligibility criteria to answer a specific research question. Okay, and it uses systematic methods to try and minimize the bias, to provide more reliable results that can be used to inform decisions and maybe policy and practice in the field. So it's quite an overarching definition provided by Higgins and Green. So when we think about this, when we break it down, a systematic review is simply a review of existing literature that aims to reduce bias and error in each stage. And this is done by identifying, critically evaluating, and providing a synthesis of relevant studies. So a systematic review can be kind of two different ways. It can be a narrative synthesis, where you simply describe the studies that you have found and bring them together, and you say what each one has found and what is the consensus. Or it can include a meta-analysis. And a meta-analysis is if you're looking at quantitative studies, and it uses is a statistical method, and it provides a synthesis of the quantitative studies to gain like a summary or an estimate overall effect size of the outcome that you're looking at. So systematic reviews that I have conducted to date have been narrative synthesis. The one I'm involved in at the minute is going to include a meta-analysis as well. So there is scope there for two different ways. Okay, so it is quite a flexible method. So just a bit of background to systematic reviews then. Where did they come from is a question. Why do we need them? Where did they come from? What are they? How do we conduct them? These are just some questions I'm going to try and answer today. So, sorry, excuse me, it's really early still in the morning here, so I haven't been talking much yet, so excuse me. So systematic reviews, they gained popularity in the early 1990s, okay, so not that long ago. And this was really due to an increase in research output and some awareness around the evidence synthesis. Okay, so synthesizing studies is a robust way and a potentially useful way to inform policy and practice, more so than what individual study results can provide. Okay, so it's an overarching review of the literature rather than just focusing on one individual study. So systematic reviews were primarily used in the field of medicine to look at different medicines, different drugs, how effective they were. But the methodology was then adapted into other disciplines such as social sciences and education. And this was to promote evidence-based policy and practice. So we have two different types of reviews. We have the systematic review and we have a narrative review. And the narrative review is maybe what we're more used to conducting. That's where we just do a literature search, where we just find different studies that are relevant to what we're looking at. There's no real method in how we find them. We just look for them and they're there. And then we write up our literature review. So that's what the narrative review is. And the systematic review uses systematic methods that are transparent and robust. So there are some differences between these two types of reviews. And systematic reviews have a couple more strengths than what a narrative review would have. So this table just outlines the differences between them. So I'm just going to go through that so it's clear what a systematic review is in comparison to different reviews such as a narrative review. So a systematic review is a synthesis of studies, and when possible it includes a meta-analysis. Okay, so it provides an overarching synthesis of studies on a particular topic. It provides overarching evidence, the overall evidence in the field on a particular topic. And if possible, it includes a meta-analysis if it's looking at quantitative studies. But on the other hand, narrative reviews are a descriptive review of the literature, and they really rely on vote counting synthesis. So what that means is if we had 10 studies that were being included in our narrative review, and we were looking at, for example, the influence of gender on educational attainment, we could say that 5 of those studies said that girls were doing better than boys, and 5 said the opposite. Okay, so it's just counting the different studies and what their results were. So it's just really descriptive. It's based on what the researcher finds in the literature, but in comparison, a systematic review is based on the overall evidence. It's not just the subset. So that leads me on to the second point. A systematic review is an extensive search of literature using systematic methods. So systematic review uses methods from the beginning of searching the literature right through to when you present the results of your systematic review. So there are systematic methods that are followed throughout, whereas then this is really to try and improve the amount of studies that you include in your systematic review, so that they provide the overall body of literature and evidence on the topic you're interested in. In comparison, a narrative review often looks at a subset of studies, which is chosen according to its availability, so maybe full text that you can access, or author selection. So it's one that the authors have found. They've selected it to be included because they think it's really good study and it's really relevant. So there's a bit of picking and choosing there, which a systematic review doesn't do. So a systematic review then has high levels of transparency due to the systematic methods that it uses. but in comparison, a narrative review has heightened risk of bias. And these biases include publication bias, dissemination bias, outcome reporting bias, confirmation and selection bias. And I'm going to talk about each of these on the next slide. So that's not to say that systematic reviews don't have any bias, because of course they do, but there's just a heightened risk in the narrative reviews. A systematic review also has a clearly defined question, okay? It has a refined research question that looks at a specific area or topic. And in comparison, narrative reviews often provide an overview of an area, so they're more general, whereas a systematic review is more focused in its area that it's looking at. And finally, in systematic reviews, data synthesis is based on data extraction and synthesis guidelines. So again, it's what I was saying earlier in the table. There are systematic methods that we follow when we're conducting a systematic review, right through from searching the literature right through to writing up the results. And these are all based on guidelines. But in comparison, when a narrative review is conducted, the data synthesis is often based on what the author selects. So they just pull out the most important parts that they think. Whereas in a systematic review, it is more methodical. Okay. So that's just an overview of the two different reviews and how they differ. So we'll be focusing on the systematic review today. So I just want to go back to the heightened risk of bias, okay, and just make you aware of the different type of bias that are often evident. It's something we don't really think about when we look at published articles or published studies, but just to make you aware, so when you're going forward, you can maybe critically think about these and evaluate studies accordingly. So different sources of bias that are particularly, the narrative reviews are particularly can be part of is publication bias. And what this means is that studies with positive results are more likely to be published than those with negative or null results. Okay, so studies that show maybe that there is a significant effect or that something has a good positive result or an effect are more likely to be published than those with negative or null results. So that is a real important bias to be aware of, especially when you're writing a review. The second one is dissemination bias. So studies with positive results are published faster, cited more often, and easier to locate. So that really links up to publication bias, okay? So if your study has positive results, it's more likely to be pushed through the publication faster, and more people are likely to cite it because you found a significant and positive result. Then we have outcome reporting bias. So that means within studies with mixed results, so that means maybe a study has found some positive results, some negative results, or maybe no significant effects within their analysis. Significant results are more likely to be reported and to have data reported. So within these mixed effects results studies, the results that show that there are significant effects are more likely to be reported than the results that have shown that there is no relationship or no effect between two variables. Then we have confirmation bias, which is a tendency to seek and accept information that confirms prior expectations. So an author may be looking for studies that confirm their hypotheses or what they think is the main narrative within a field, so they can go and search for those studies and maybe disregard the studies that don't show that. Okay, so it's confirmation bias, which in systematic reviews isn't such a big area because there are systematic methods to search the literature, so you're not picking and choosing which studies that you include in your review. And finally, we have selection bias, which is resulting from a selection of studies into your systematic review. So just some strengths and limitations of systematic reviews before we start to think, how do we conduct a systematic review? What does it involve? So a systematic review's strengths, it provides greater strength of evidence than a single study. So it's what I've said earlier. It includes all relevant research in a particular topic or an area that relates to your research question. Secondly, it is an opportunity to investigate variation of results and what works in certain settings. So it's interested in all studies, okay, to provide an overall synthesis of the evidence. So it's not going to exclude studies if it finds no significant results or finds different results to another study, okay? So it's looking at variation in results because it's including all relevant studies. And then that allows us to think critically about what works in certain settings, okay? So that really relates to evidence-based practice. It allows for that. Thirdly, it is a readily available method. So once you understand the different steps to conduct a systematic review, once you have a research question that you're interested in, you are equipped to conduct a systematic review. So it's a readily available method. Fourthly, it generates principles and methods that minimize error and bias at each stage. So as you follow systematic guidelines and a methodology, this is really allowing the risk of error and bias to be minimized at each stage because we're following steps throughout the process. So there is a lesser risk of author error and bias coming into play. So this really means that systematic reviews are unbiased and objective syntheses of research. And finally, it provides an overview, an accurate overview of the existing body of knowledge in an area. But that's not to say that there are no limitations to a systematic review. Of course, every research method has limitations. And so some of the limitations of systematic reviews include that they are too stringent in criteria and too narrowly focused. So a systematic review often has a refined research question looking at a specific area of a topic. So for some, it is criticised as being too narrowly focused, which questions how relevant and how useful can they be. Secondly, it can also be exclusive of evidence according to the inclusion criteria. So what that means is when we conduct a systematic review, we have an inclusion and exclusion criteria to allow us to understand what studies would be eligible to be included in our research synthesis. So according to that, if we have a very exclusive inclusion criteria that excludes a lot of studies, it can exclude evidence that may have been relevant. So it can be exclusive and remove studies. And thirdly, it may combine poor quality studies to produce estimated effect sizes of the population that may not be reliable. Okay, so some systematic reviews include studies that are of poor quality and then use this maybe for their meta-analysis, which can affect the overall effect size that is calculated, but you don't need to worry about that if you're not doing a meta-analysis. What to take from that limitation is if there are poor quality studies, they may have different results to more robust studies, which then can leave a question of what is the consensus in the field. So another key question is, when should we conduct a systematic review? Okay, that's a key question because it's great to know what this method is. It's great to have the tools to do it. But when should we really conduct one? So my thoughts, and Pettigrew and Roberts, where I have sourced this from, have stated that when previous research on an issue has been conducted and there is still some uncertainty about an issue, okay, so that can include maybe a policy, a particular service, or an intervention and its effectiveness. So there might already be some research out there, but maybe there is still some uncertainty about how effective this policy or an intervention is. And maybe then a systematic review would be really useful to try and collate that evidence. Secondly, if there is a need for evidence when developing a policy or initiative. So before even a policy or an initiative is developed and implemented, maybe there is a need to justify why it is needed. So a systematic review can collate the evidence, provide a synthesis, and help push forward why developing an initiative or policy is very beneficial. Thirdly, maybe there are some unanswered questions remaining about a topic despite research being conducted. Okay, so maybe there is a body of evidence out there within a topic that you're interested in, but there are still some unanswered questions, okay? Maybe why or how. So a systematic review can be very beneficial to try and see what research is out there to answer these questions that you think are unanswered. And then that can allow you to see a research gap and direct your future research, as number 4 says. So if there is a need for an overall picture of the evidence to direct future research, a systematic review can be very beneficial. And finally, if there is a need for accurately combining previous research and methodologies to promote the development of new methodologies. So Pettigrew and Roberts is a very good book. If you are interested in conducting a systematic review, they go step by step, as I will do, so into the different processes and steps that you should follow when conducting a systematic review. So I would definitely recommend looking at their book for more information if you're interested. So at this point, I just wanted to see in the audience today, if from the discussion so far, if you think that there are any areas that you think would benefit from a systematic review in the field of education or social sciences more generally, according to your area of expertise. It's okay if you're not sure or you don't know, that's okay, don't worry. I just wanted to get some people's thoughts on that. And feel free to write it in the chat if you don't want to speak on camera.
Okay, yeah. Participants or audience, Erin has opened discussion point. Okay, you may read on the screen. Are there any areas that you think would benefit from a systematic review in the field of education? You may give your ideas directly, or maybe you can use chat. Okay, Erin, how about if you want to take a picture of the education, for example, in Indonesia, so perhaps this method can really useful for us. Am I right, Erin?
Yeah, exactly. So if you want to look at the overall picture of a specific area of education in Indonesia, you can most definitely formulate a research question in relation to that, and then accordingly search the literature. And I'm going to, in my next part of the presentation, I'm going to go through the different steps that you follow to do that. So yeah, most definitely it can provide an overall picture of an area that you're interested in, which then allows you to think critically once you have conducted your systematic review. Okay, where are the research gaps here? Where do I want to maybe look into this further, or what needs further work? So yeah. But don't worry if you don't have any ideas. This is just really to get you thinking about, where could maybe benefit from a systematic review. Maybe you're really interested in a particular area in social sciences or education. And this is really just to help you start to think, could a systematic review be beneficial based on the different reasons that you conduct a systematic review that I outlined in the previous slide. So don't worry.
Okay.
So I will move on to my next slide if there's no other questions at this point.
Sorry, okay. Excuse me. I just want to confirm what I was thinking about. Yeah, my name is Adolfina. Hello, Erin. Yeah,
nice to meet you.
Yeah, thank you. Nice to meet you too. Yeah, I just want to only to share or something I have in my mind about. I think this would be benefit on the curriculum itself. How the government construct the curriculum, yeah, in several stages, and also several names, and also how to implement in the school level. So it might be a bit different between one school to another. So I think also it has an impact on what is it? The policy of the education itself. For example, in Indonesia, and also it has an impact on the local language itself, because you know, in Indonesia there are a lot of local languages that we have to bring into. I mean, all students come with different background, cultural background. That's what I was thinking about. I don't know if you are. I mean, your opinion. I just it across in my mind.
Yeah,
that's what.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. That's a really good idea, and it's very interesting because, you know, in different contexts, such as Indonesia, it's very different to the UK. So of course, there are going to be different areas of research synthesis that you can think about. So that's definitely very interesting, and there'd definitely be scope there to do some work looking at, you know, how the curriculum is implemented in different areas, or, you know, different schools, as you say. So definitely, as long as there has been some research previously done on that, then yes, I think that's very interesting. And as you say, very important for policy going forward as well, to ensure, you know, equality and it's implemented fairly throughout. So yeah, it's really, really good thought, and very interesting as well. So thank you.
You're welcome, Erin.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm just going to move on to the next part, which is really the different stages that we conduct when, sorry, that just all them coming up. I'm like, oh, what's coming up here? So yes, the different stages that we conduct when implementing a systematic review. And again, these stages I have taken from Pettigrew and Roberts, the book that I was talking about previously. So again, you can go back to that book for more information if you are interested. So to conduct a systematic review, the following stages are implemented. Firstly, we come up with a refined research question. Okay, what are we actually interested in looking at? What question, what overarching question do we want to answer with this systematic review? Secondly, we determine the study design to be included. So this refers to the inclusion and exclusion criteria. So what type of studies are we interested in? Okay, so you could think broadly, are we interested only in quantitative studies, qualitative studies, you know, a specific method within those disciplines? Thirdly, we develop a search string and a search strategy, and that allows us then to search the literature in a systematic way. The fourth thing we do is we write a protocol once we have conducted steps 1 to 3. And then we conduct our literature review. Following on from those steps, we then screen the results of our literature review. We then extract the relevant data from the results that we have screened. We then assess the methodological rigor and overall quality of included studies. And then we synthesize the studies that we're including in the review. So that's really where we write up the different, when we write up the results of our systematic review and what the different studies have said. Then we have to think critically about the review that we have conducted, okay? So critically evaluate what we have done, what were the limitations of our review, and going forward, what could be done differently. And then we report and present the results. So there are 11 steps that I'm going to go through. I'm going to have a break when I get to the protocol, okay? So once I do the first 4 steps, I'm going to have a 5-minute break because I don't want to overload you with all the 11 steps at once. So I hope that works okay. So, process of writing a systematic review. The first step that we need to do is we need to formulate a refined research question. So what that means is, very simply, the topic or issue that you want to investigate with your review. Okay, what do you want to look at with your systematic review? What is the overarching question that you want to answer? So a research question must be well defined. And this is to ensure that the review that you're going to undertake is manageable within your given time frame. And that is really, if you have a wide research question, you're going to have a lot of studies that may be eligible that you're going to have to synthesize. Whereas if you have a very well-defined research question that has a specific focus, it should be manageable if you have a shorter time frame. And secondly, you want to make sure that your research question is well defined to ensure that it is conceptually clear to enable a differentiation between relevant and irrelevant studies. So if you're conceptually clear about what you're interested in looking at through your research question, it means when you go to screen the literature and you maybe have 200 studies that you have to screen, you will be very clear about which studies are relevant to the question that you are asking and which aren't relevant. So it's important to take time to really refine your research question and ensure that it's going to catch all the relevant studies that you think are important for your review. So that is the first step. Come up with a research question, which sounds very easy, but of course we all know it can be quite a lengthy and hard process to do so. So when you're thinking about formulating your research question, you should consider the following questions. What evidence is needed to address the question? The outcome and intervention should have operational definitions. So that's just ensuring that you're conceptually clear about what you're interested in looking at. The conceptual relationship between being studied is clear and well defined. So for example, in a systematic review that I conducted previously, I was looking at the relationship between gender and social class on PISA attainment. Okay, so it was conceptually clear what was being studied there, what the outcome of PISA attainment and how the comparators of gender and social class affected the outcome. So just ensure what you're looking at is well defined and clear in your research question. You also want to consider the theoretical or practical context that the question is situated in. So for example, if you're interested in looking at a specific geographical area, so if it's Indonesia, you can include that in your systematic review question, okay? And also ask yourself, is there enough research available on the topic to warrant a systematic review? You don't want to go to all this effort if there's only maybe 2 studies that are out there. Okay, you want to ensure that it's going to be worth your while to do a systematic review and an evidence synthesis. So your research question should clearly state the population of interest. So who are you interested in looking at? Okay, is it university students? Is it very young pupils in what we call primary school? I'm not sure if it's elementary school or different with yourselves, high school, middle school, anything like that. What is the population of interest that you're interested in? Secondly, what is the intervention being focused upon? So, you know, is it the curriculum? Is it a policy? Is it attainment in a particular test? Okay, what is the intervention? The comparators, so what are you comparing this against? So for instance, as I said in the example previously, in a systematic review I conducted with a team, we were looking at gender and social class as our comparators, okay? So what are you comparing the outcome against? Then we have the outcome of interest and the context and time period being considered. So, you know, maybe you're only interested in a specific time frame or a specific geographical area. So you can include that in your research question. So you can see that I have outlined or underlined, sorry, the PICO. So this is known as the PICO framework, which is quite a good little acronym to remember kind of the key areas that you should be looking at in your research question or in your inclusion criteria as well. So PICOs, which stands for population, intervention, comparators, and outcomes, okay? So once you have your formulated and refined research question, the second stage is to put together your inclusion and exclusion criteria. So what this does is this really describes the types of studies that you're interested in, okay? The interventions that you're maybe interested in, the population that you want to look at, and outcomes of particular importance. And this really then allows you to put together an inclusion and exclusion criteria of what studies may be eligible for your systematic review. So this is really, you're writing a list of studies that will be eligible if they meet these criteria. So factors that you can consider at this stage is the year of publication. So maybe you're only interested in studies that were conducted in the last 10 years. So you might want to refine the year of publication from 2011 to 2021. Okay, so that could be part of your inclusion criteria, where you say if a study is conducted in 2009, it will not be eligible for the systematic review because we are looking at the last 10 years. Secondly, publication status. What that means is, are you just going to look at studies that are peer reviewed and published? Or are you going to look at maybe grey literature? And grey literature includes maybe dissertations by students, PhD theses, government reports, third sector reports, charity reports, preprints, things like that there, which can help overcome some of the publication bias of, you know, the positive results mainly being reported in peer-reviewed articles. So publication status, are you going to say this review is inclusive of all different types of publications, or are you going to say, no, we're only looking at peer-reviewed articles? Okay, again, you can state that in your inclusion and exclusion criteria. Context refers to two things: the geographical context. So are you only interested in a particular country? So for example, Indonesia, are you only interested in the UK, America, Australia, anything like that? And secondly, are you looking at a specific context within education or social sciences? So, you know, is it elementary schools or is it, you know, universities? You can be specific about that as well. And that really relates then to your population of interest. You should state what the population that you're interested in your inclusion criteria. So this might be, for example, students that are of a particular age, students that are in a particular year in school, that they're in a particular year at university. Or it can also be affected by, you know, like gender, social class, any of those socio-demographic factors as well. The interventions that you're interested in, also explicitly state them. And the comparators. So if you're looking at how attainment, for example, differs according to gender of pupils, you can include that in your comparators. So it's very clear if a study looks at attainment according to where somebody lives, and that's not what you're interested in, you're only interested in gender and they don't include gender, you know that that will be excluded from your study. The outcome measures, you need to state what your outcome measure is. So is it a particular assessment? Is it a particular policy effect? Anything like that. So what is the outcome you're interested in? That should be included in your inclusion criteria. And study design, that refers to broadly, are you looking at quantitative studies or qualitative studies? Are you looking at both? That's fine too. And if you are, for example, only looking at quantitative studies, is there particular methods within quantitative research that you're only going to look at? So is it randomized controlled trials, quasi-experimental, things like that there? So what is the study design? It's equally fine to keep that quite broad if that's what you want. So I've just put at the bottom of that slide in small writing, PICOs can help to guide the inclusion criteria of your review. So in the previous slide, I said PICO, P-I-C-O, and this time I've said PICOs, so I've added an S on the end. So study design is also very important when you think about your inclusion criteria. So in the little box then, I just provided some little pointers. So the more detailed that you make your inclusion and exclusion criteria, the easier it is to search the literature in a clear and efficient manner. So it's very clear what type of studies you're interested in, what studies are going to be eligible, and which can you say, no, that's not of relevance to this systematic review, and exclude it. So the more detail you put into your inclusion and exclusion criteria, the easier it'll be to quickly and efficiently search the literature when you do your search. The more explicit you are in your inclusion criteria, the less likelihood of having bias and error, okay? Because it's very clear to the reader of your review what is being included and what's being excluded from your study and why that is the case. So that reduces the likelihood of author bias, being like, oh, well, we'll just include that one because it might be relevant. Because if it doesn't meet your inclusion criteria, then it won't be included in the review. And it also reduces error of maybe an author saying, yes, this is relevant, but it's not relevant because there's a clear criteria that it has to meet. And just ensure to justify your decisions. So when you're writing your inclusion criteria and you're maybe looking at the publication status, so if you are saying, I'm going to include both peer-reviewed articles and also grey literature, justify why you're doing that. So for example, you're being inclusive of all research evidence that may be out there and not only those that are peer-reviewed, because you're aware of different bias that may occur. So it's just important that you can justify your decisions, and that's again to try and reduce any bias that may appear. So far we have formulated our research question and we have put together our inclusion and exclusion criteria. The third step that we then want to do is to develop a search string and strategy. So a search string refers to the terms that are used to search the literature databases. So that is simply a string of terms or concepts that link to your formulated research question. And to ensure that the most effective search string is used, you can conduct several preliminary searches to determine which is most successful, okay? So when you put together your search string, it will include all the key concepts in relation to your research question and what you're interested in. And sometimes it can be difficult to know whether to have a lot of concepts in your search string or keep it very short. So you can play around with that before you kind of commit to your final one. So when you develop your search string, be sure to think of these different operators that you can include. So and, or not. So if you're looking at like education and you're interested in attainment, you can include education and attainment. Okay, so and means that both terms must be present in the paper to appear in the search. So it combines different concepts. Or means that either term may be present for the paper to appear in the search. So this is really used to search for synonyms and related phrases. So for example, if we want to look for a trial or experiment study, okay, so it'd be either or, whereas the and is both education and attainment must be included. And not means that certain terms will not be included in the presented results. So using not, we don't do very often because it excludes studies, and sometimes we don't want to exclude studies that might be eligible or relevant for our review. So and or are particularly important in your search string. So once we have put together our research question, then we put together our inclusion and exclusion criteria and developed our search string, we then have to put together our protocol. And a protocol is simply a plan of what your systematic review is going to look at and the methods that you're going to do for the data synthesis. So a protocol includes information on literature, so a literature background. So why do we need this systematic review? Why is it important? A description of the intervention and outcome measures. So what are you interested in looking at? What are you comparing your outcome against? So what comparators are you looking at? What is the research question of your systematic review? Okay, what are you interested in looking at and why? And then the methodology. So that really refers to what is your search string? What is your search strategy? So what databases are you going to search the literature on? Then you will talk about your data collection and analysis. Okay, so how are you going to collect the data and analyze it? And then how are you going to synthesize it? So usually when you write a protocol, you will have done your literature search, you will know what the intervention outcomes are, and you will know your research question. So you'll have done those already. And then you're really looking forward to your methodology, your data analysis, and your data synthesis as well. So this is really a document that is a frame of reference for yourself when you are conducting your systematic review that you can go back to and say, okay, in systematic review, we said we were going to do this in the protocol, so we will follow this now. And it just means that if somebody else picked up your protocol outside of your research team or outside of your class, they could follow step by step your protocol and get the same results in your systematic review. So it's really just for transparency and accuracy and to minimize the risk of bias and error. And you can publish your protocols in some journals. They accept them or as a preprint as well before you actually conduct your review. So they're very useful and a very important step for a systematic review. So that is the first stages of conducting a systematic review. Okay, so there are the preliminary stages that you must go through before you start to screen the results, screen the literature, and start to synthesize the studies. So I want to take a break for 5 minutes at that point to let that settle in your heads. And then when we come back, I'm going to talk about searching the literature and synthesizing the studies. So I hope that's okay. So if we have a break for 5 minutes. So if we come back at 5 past, would that work okay?
Okay.
Yeah,
5 minutes, only 5 minutes, or 5 to 10 minutes, or 15 minutes. That's okay.
Which is whatever works. I'm happy with 5. Just whatever works.
Okay, then. Yeah. So 10 minutes, I guess. Yeah, that's okay.
Perfect. That's wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much, Erin.
Okay, thank you, Erin. So we have a break for 10 minutes, ya, Ibu Dina, ya.
Okay, yeah, 10 minutes, Ibu Dr. Sarsi. So how about the plan, Bu Siti Sarsi?
Okay, well, we can see on the screen in the chat, there is a question basically has already put there from Miss D. Okay, but I think Erin can answer after she continue explaining about next step, yeah, step 5, and some steps after that.
Yeah, that's grand. There will be time for discussion at the end as well. So I'm happy to answer questions at any point, but more than happy as well to have a discussion at the end and hear any ideas or questions as well.
Okay. At the end of the discussion. Okay. Yeah.
Great. See you in 10 minutes.
Okay, I'll see you in 10 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. Okay, Ibu Dina.
Okay, yeah, Bu Siti Sarsi, we can start with the quiz, I guess.
Yeah, the quiz.
Okay. So how about the first questions? Should the first questions about Erin or our questions about international office?
About our speakers today,
Okay.
and the second one perhaps about international office. Yeah. Okay. Do you have a question for the quiz, Ibu Dina?
Okay. Wait for a minute. Okay, team. Bu Poppy. Yeah.
Okay, the audience or participants, Ibu Dina has prepared, what is it, a very...
Merchandise. We have merchandise for yeah.
Okay,
semua partisipan.
Who can answer the question from Ibu Dina or from
the team, EO team.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
International Office team. Okay.
Okay.
Please,
Ya.
Ibu.
Ya, terima kasih Ibu Siti Sarsi.
Oke, ya.
Beberapa pertanyaan kepada partisipan mengenai IO kita.
Oke.
Bisa menjawab, tolong di kolom komentar saja ya. Oke, pertanyaan yang pertama. Oh iya.
Terangkan merchandise-nya apa, Bu Pop?
Yang bisa menjawab dengan benar mendapatkan merchandise kami.
Merchandise-nya mungkin bisa ditampilkan, Bu, ya? Apa masih rahasia?
Ini nih, bentar ya. Bentar, saya harus ditutup dulu kayaknya. Ini ya? Gini kan? Aduh, bentar. Kayaknya harus
ada beberapa merchandise yang kita kasih silahkan jawab.
Bentar, saya harus nggak pakai background supaya kelihatan merchandise-nya nih, gimana caranya? Nggak kelihatan soalnya nih kalau pakai virtual background.
Ya, ini
ya.
Ini merchandise kita.
Oke, ini nih. Ya.
Tumbler.
Kelihatan ya. Okay, Tumblr. We have Tumblr for the quiz, and the questions is about international office. Okay, there will be another questions, yeah, about Erin's topic or materials. We have T-shirt, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, Bu Poppy, please.
Ya, silakan nanti pada partisipan yang bisa menjawab, silakan ketik jawabannya di kolom komentar. Untuk pertanyaan yang pertama. Selain kegiatan short course kita sore hari ini, sebutkan salah satu program dari IO kita. IO. Selain short course kita yang ini ya. Oke.
Sebutkan
salah satu program dari IO kita selain short course ini. Ada banyak banget kegiatan kita.
Baik. Ya, dari 212 peserta sore ini ada banyak yang menjawab ini, Bu Poppy dan
Kemudian Ada International Education Expo.
Expo Education, International Educational Expo,
Ya.
PLI Corner. Oke, ada dua jawaban yang hampir sama, yang berbeda ya. Satu Education, Expo Education, ada 3 orang yang menjawab nih Bu Poppy. Kemudian untuk
Ya.
PLI Corner, oke.
Mengirimkan alamat detailnya ya. Nanti kan kita kirim via ekspedisi. Satu.
Bu Poppy, berapa peserta yang bisa yang dipilih?
Oke, saya siswa yang sini. Muhammad Farhan. Jawaban ya, betul. Kemudian Aisyah Piani untuk 2 yang dapat menjawab. Ya. Ya.
Terima kasih Bu Poppy.
Thank you Bu Poppy.
Oke.
Oke, jadi bagaimana Budin? Semuanya?
Ya, berarti 2 orang tadi ya, 2 orang yang tadi telah disebutkan. Jangan lupa kan masuk di please send your email, not email address, your address in WhatsApp, ya, so we can send the merchandise to your home address.
Ulang lagi Budin pemenangnya.
Tadi kan Wisrina Mulyani, ya, siapa lagi Bu? Dan Muhammad Ramdhani.
Muhammad Ramdhani dan Ibu
Wisrina Mulyani.
Srina Mulyani. Oke, Srina Mulyani. Virtual International Educational Expo. Right. Baik, selamat untuk 2 pemenang merchandise dari International Office. Oke, kita akan beralih ke pertanyaan tentang Erin ya, Bu Dina.
Kan Ibu?
Berapa merchandise yang disiapkan?
Bentar. Bentar ya. Berapa? 2 ya, 2 kaos, 2 t-shirt for this quiz.
Oke, baik. 2 t-shirt. Ini sekarang kita akan menghadirkan t-shirt dari International Office. Pasti ada gambarnya Bu Dina dan teman-teman ya di situ ya.
Nggak ada.
Oke, baik. Pertanyaan yang agak berbeda tentang apa namanya, tentang temanya masih sama, tentang systematic review. Dan saya atau Bu Dina nih yang mau kasih pertanyaan.
Bu moderator saja.
Oh ya.
Please.
Baik. Ya. Sebagai sebuah metode, nggak kira-kira ya, saya pikir apa sih yang menjadi key atau kata kunci dari systematic review ini? Silahkan boleh kemukakan pendapat. Sebagai sebuah metode penelitian, apa yang menjadi kata kunci dari metode ini yang berbeda dari metode-metode yang lain?
Ini doang gua.
Silahkan.
Ini contoh t-shirtnya ya.
Itu adalah hadiah atau merchandise yang bisa diperoleh. Oke, ada yang sudah menjawab SCOPS. Scope. Because. Oke.
2.000. Harus 2.000. Iya.
Oke, Bu Dina, banyak sekali yang sudah menjawab ya.
You can select, Bu Arsi.
You can help me, Bu Dina.
One thing for sure, not Isrina Mulyani. Yeah, Isrina, you already got the merchandise from the first questions. Up to you, yeah. Bu Siti Swarsi, you have the privilege.
Oke. Ya.
Buat apa? Kucing buat ini project ya. Ya tuh nggak apa-apa.
Okay, Erin is back. Okay, Erin, we have a quiz.
Yeah.
And question is, what is the keywords of systematic review?
Ah.
Okay, so you can see the answers from the audiences. If you can help me, you can pick 2 names there of participants. Okay, so most of them answers that the key words or the the distinctive, perhaps the distinctive methods. This method from others is PICOS or PICOS.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Okay, so you want me to pick some names?
Yeah.
2 names, yeah?
2 names.
Okay, I'm gonna go with Clara Angel for 1.
Clara Angel. Okay, congratulations for Clara Angel. And then the second one?
Let's see. Is it Husna Nadia?
Husna Nadia. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. We got 2 names. Thank you, Erin.
Apologies if my pronunciation was not very good.
It's really good pronouncing the names of Indonesian. Okay. So you can back to your elaboration, Erin.
Yes, great. Thank you so much. I hope everybody enjoyed that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hope that break was okay and the information so far has settled into your minds. So, as I said, we have done the first 4 steps of a systematic review, and now we're going to look at the next few. So, the next one is searching the databases, so your search strategy. So what this means is using the search string, okay, so that's the concepts and terms using the and or of the key concepts. We're going to select databases and screen for relevant papers or studies. So selected databases refer to different databases that we go to search for the literature. So this could include ERIC, Web of Knowledge, Web of Science, Scopus, PsycInfo, those type of ones. I will discuss this in more detail tomorrow as well, so don't panic if you're like, oh, databases, I'm not sure what that means. So when we do a systematic review, we select certain databases that we're going to search to try and find relevant papers, okay? So as I have mentioned in this presentation, if you can, your literature searches should include grey literature to overcome search, selection and publication bias. And that's really to ensure you're being inclusive of all research evidence that's out there and that you're trying to overcome the publication bias as well in relation to positive results being more likely to be put into peer-reviewed journals. So just a reminder that grey literature includes dissertations, theses, reports and preprints. And usually the databases that we search include an option that you can include grey literature, but there is also some databases that just search for grey literature. So for example, there is the ProQuest theses and dissertations database, which just looks for dissertations and PhD theses from students that have been deposited. So that is your search strategy, which includes your search string that we have spoke about, and then the selected databases that you want to implement this search string on to try and find relevant studies. So when we're searching the literature, many databases have internal filters to refine the search results further in line with your review focus. And we can use these to try and reduce down the amount of results that we return that may not be relevant And it's just important that if you do use these internal filters, that you talk about it in your systematic review and in your methods. So it's very clear if somebody came along and wanted to conduct the same systematic review, they know exactly what you've done, what filters that you have included, so they can try and replicate it the same way. So this screenshot on this slide is from the British Education Index. And you can see that at the top, on the left-hand side at the top, you can see that this is where you can include your search string. Okay, so you can include your different terms, and they actually have the operators there. So the and, there's 2 ands there, but you could change that to or if you want. Then we have, if we want to limit our results to full text, we have publication type. So it's selected at all at the minute because we're being inclusive. But if you wanted to only search for academic journals or books or different types of publications, you can select that here. Then we have language. So that's also important to include in your inclusion criteria. If you can only read in a certain language, you should state that you're only going to include studies of that language. So for example, in systematic reviews that I have conducted previously, we have stated only studies that are in English, because that is what the author team were proficient in. So again, you can choose that in relation to your own area of expertise. You can then include the age level. So what is the population of interest in studies? The publication date. So that's what I was saying earlier. If you're interested in only looking at the last 10 years, for example, you can include here that you're only going to look from 2010 or 2011 to 2021. Okay, so that will refine all your search results by date, that any study that is outside of that time frame will not be included in the results. Then there is document type and education level as well. So you can see that there are lots of internal filters that you can use for your review and for screening the literature. But you don't have to use them all. You don't have to use them at all. I usually use the publication date and the language one as the key ones for reviewing the literature. So once we have got together our search string, we have selected the databases and implemented our search strategy, and we have we've searched the literature accordingly. We then need to screen our results. Okay, so that means when we include our search string up here, okay, and we press search, when that brings back, say, 100 results, we then have to go through each of those and say, are they eligible for inclusion in the systematic review, or are they not eligible? So are they going to be excluded? So that refers to screening results, step 6. So all results must be screened at title and abstract level to identify studies that meet the inclusion criteria. Okay, so this is why it's really important to have a very explicit inclusion and exclusion criteria, because when you come to this stage, it'll be very clear which studies are eligible and which are not eligible for inclusion in your systematic review. However, it doesn't matter how well you put together your inclusion criteria. Sometimes of title and abstract, you're still unsure if a study is eligible for your systematic review. Okay, maybe they just haven't provided enough detail for you to decide if they're eligible. So I always think if you're unsure, include it for the next stage of screening, because you want to try and be inclusive of the studies rather than limiting your search. So once we have screened a title and abstract, and we have included and excluded studies accordingly, then we need to obtain full papers of those studies that have passed the initial title and abstract screening to screen in text against inclusion and exclusion criteria. So screening results has 2 levels. We have first level at title and abstract, And then those that are eligible, title and abstract, get screened at the second level, which is in text. So all screening gets done against your inclusion and exclusion criteria. And at this point, it is very useful to put together a data extraction form. And this is just to ensure that you are consistent and transparent in your methods. So if you exclude a study, you can maybe write, why have you excluded it? So if somebody asked you, why did you exclude that study? You have your reason there, because if you're going to be screening 100 results, it can get quite confusing at, why have I excluded that one? Oh, I'm not sure. So it's just for transparency to reduce your bias and error as well. But again, I will talk in more detail about data extraction forms tomorrow, so don't worry. So that's our screening results. And once we do that, we will then have the eligible studies that we can include in our systematic review. So when the screening has been conducted, we are sitting with the studies that are eligible to be included in our systematic review. We then need to extract the relevant data according to the inclusion and exclusion criteria of the studies that have made it to our systematic review and our synthesis. So again, having a data extraction form is important at this point because it allows you to pull out all the relevant information, and your inclusion and exclusion criteria are very useful to help you structure your data extraction form. So the data extraction form should include information on the following. And again, you can include more if you feel like it's necessary when you're doing your review. These are only some ideas. So we have PICOS, which everybody seems to know now with the competition. So that refers to the population, the intervention, comparators, outcome measures, and study design. So you're going to want to pull out, what population is this study looking at? Okay, what is the intervention and outcome that they're looking at? Is it a particular test, a particular intervention? The comparators, so are they comparing, attainment against gender or social class, something like that? The study design, so is it quantitative, qualitative? What is the specific method that they've used? Then the publication date as well. So, was it a really recent study that's just came out, or is it a few years old? The methods, which aligns to study design. Then the context. So context refers to two things. So it's the geographical context and also then the context within that geographical area. So is it a school, a university, a nursery, kindergarten, anything like that. Then you need to put together the key study results, okay? So what did they find? What are the key results that they reported? And is there any study limitations? So, had they a small sample size? Did they not execute their methods well? Anything like that? What was the limitations of the study? And it is important that if it's possible that more than one reviewer should be included in the screening and data extraction process. So this means that you could get a colleague or a fellow student or somebody, anybody, to help you screen the results from your literature search to ensure that you haven't made any errors. And also in the data extraction process, if you can include more than one reviewer, so more than yourself, it can also help to reduce any bias and error. And it's just really to ensure that you both make the same decisions, you both agree on the studies that should be included and excluded, and you both agree on the key information that is being extracted from the studies, for the synthesis. So once we have done the extraction of data into our data extraction forms, we want to assess the methodological and overall quality of included studies. And the purpose of this is to assist in identifying any potential bias or inaccuracy with the study. whilst helping to interpret the data in its practical and theoretical context. So this is really part of the critical evaluation of the studies that we have included in our synthesis. So we just want to critically think, are there any potential inaccuracies there, which we can include in the limitations, or any potential bias from the study. And this is very important as it can then help us interpret the data accurately, and it can also help us think about it in relation to the practical and theoretical context. Okay, so we can help situate the data more accurately accordingly. So the results from this stage will be used when you write up your results. So when the synthesis is conducted, it can be the critical evaluation of the information that is collected. So once we have got all the information extracted from the relevant studies into our data extraction forms, and we have evaluated the quality and rigor of the studies that we have included, then we are going to synthesize the studies. So what this means is we're simply combining the results across studies. We're looking for any differences in the results between the studies to provide an overall summary of the findings. So when we conduct a synthesis, we really want to consider the author's discussion on the following. So what analysis was carried out? So what methods did they use in their study? Did they have any missing data, and did that impact on their study and their findings? Was there any limitations of the findings or of the study that may have impacted the overall study? The practical interpretation of the effects that are reported. And we also want to distinguish between study-generated and synthesis-generated evidence. Okay, so this stage is really us starting to write the systematic review. Okay, it's bringing together all the different results of the studies that are eligible for inclusion in the synthesis and starting to compare what they have found. Are there differences? Why might there be differences? Is there different sample sizes, different methods used, different missing data, different missing data strategies, things like that there, to really consider why we might see variation, or maybe we don't see variation as well, and we can discuss why there is no variation there. So, as I have just said, when we are pulling together the results of different studies, really just consider variation in populations. Okay, are they looking at the same population? Hopefully they are if you have had a very specific research question and a specific inclusion criteria. The interventions and outcomes, were they the same, or was there any variation? And how might that have affected differences in results? What methods were used? So did they use the same statistical method or the same qualitative method? Did that lead to the same results, or might that have led to variation? Was it in the same context or the same setting? So for example, if you have a systematic review and you're looking at, you haven't restricted it by geographical location. So if you're including more than one country, but you're looking at attainment at a certain age, then the context in the UK will be very different to a context in a different country that has a different education system. So that might help you understand why there might be variation in results from numerous studies. So just think critically about the context and the settings. Are they similar? Are there differences? And might that then have caused variation? And the same goes for study design, which really links to the methods. So once you have synthesized the studies and thought about this variation, integrating the different studies together and writing this up as a discussion, you will have provided a summary of the research evidence, drawing really upon its conclusiveness to the population and any limitations. And at this point, then you can critically reflect, are there any gaps from doing this research synthesis, are there any research gaps that going forward future research could, you know, look at and fill that gap? So key areas to report when presenting research. Oh, let me start that again. Key areas to report when presenting the results. Think about the effects of an intervention and outcomes. Okay, so if you're looking at an intervention and how that has affected outcomes for students, for example, think about their effects. Think of the summary of results that are provided by authors, the evidence quality. Okay, so what is the rigor of the study that you've included, any biases that may have occurred, limitations of the study, and key findings. And if you can, relate these to theoretical assumptions or frameworks, policy or practice. So these key areas are really what I have spoke about in the slides after our break. And it can be quite, you know, there's a lot to think about when doing a systematic review, and if you have quite a few studies included in your synthesis, it can be difficult to understand how to really pull them together. But there is a lot of literature out there and a lot of guidelines that can help with this process. So these are all readily available online, and they include Prisma, Quorum, Moose, Campbell and Cochrane, to name a few. And these all have different documents that help you with your systematic review. Okay, so the different steps to conduct, as I have spoke about here, and how to go about them, what information should be included in each section. And with places like Campbell, you can also publish your systematic review through them. They are very helpful throughout the whole process. So it's not an isolated process of doing a systematic review. There are organisations and different guidelines out there that can help you. So as I said, for greater dissemination, if you were interested in trying to get your systematic review out there, you can look into Campbell, collaboration, Cochrane, and also journal articles. There are many journals that accept systematic reviews and synthesis of studies that a systematic review does, which is very important because systematic reviews are great for trying to improve policy and practice and improve the use of evidence-based policy and practice. So some general recommendations from conducting systematic reviews that is important to think about. So as I have said, make sure that you develop a refined research question and ensure that it has manageable scope within the given time frame of your study. The more detailed your inclusion and exclusion criteria, the easier it is to understand and search the literature in a clear and efficient manner. And this will also reduce chances of error and bias. And if you think it's helpful, conduct preliminary searches with different search strings to determine which is most effective. So which concepts or which terms are most effective, and then you can talk about that when you write up your systematic review and justify why you have decided on your final search string. And when you go and you find studies, you might find there is some information that is missing, that is very important for you to include and have in your systematic review. So don't feel afraid to contact authors, especially when authors publish their work. There is always a corresponding author and an email address that you can contact if you have any questions or want to discuss their work. And authors usually really like that people take an interest in their work. So don't feel afraid to contact authors about their work and ask questions about it. So if you need clarification, if maybe there's a missing information about how many people were included in their study, feel free to email them. And if they email back, that's great. It'll help you decide whether you can include their study or exclude it. but it also helps with your justifications for including and excluding studies. And it also helps with the transparency of your methods. So contact authors if you're just not sure whether their study really fits what you're looking at, because there's some missing information, and usually they're very helpful in giving that to you. Ensure you have clear conceptual definitions. So this makes it easier when you have hundreds of abstracts to screen, as you are sure of what your study is interested in and what meets your criteria. Okay, so it's just being clear of what you're interested in, what you are looking at, and what your research question is. Also feel free to speak to librarians in your area of expertise for guidance if you're unsure of maybe some search terms that you could include, or particular databases. So if you're not sure of what the most popular databases are in your area, or even a search strategy. So, you know, what databases should I include? Are they going to be, you know, effective? Feel free to reach out to experts in the field, and they can also help guide you. Include grey literature when possible, to really be inclusive of the evidence that's out there, and to overcome search, selection and publication bias. So it's really to try and minimise at all times, reducing any likelihood of error and bias in the systematic review. And if it's possible, recruit a colleague to help validate your screening and decisions to again reduce risk of error and bias. And that again is really to try and improve the transparency of your methods. So thank you very much. That is my presentation today. I have left time. I wanted to leave a good bit of time today to talk about any questions or have a discussion, because I know it's quite a lot of information to take in if you're not used to doing systematic reviews. So I'm more than happy to discuss or go over some points in more detail if needed. So please feel free to ask any. In tomorrow's session, I'm going to go over the key steps again, but I'm going to also have an example of the systematic review that we have conducted to show you how these steps in practice work. So don't worry if it seems a bit abstract right now. I will try and consolidate that understanding tomorrow.
Okay, thank you, Erin, for your lovely description.
Thank you.
Okay, yes. Erin, in the chat, we read that there is a question for you. Okay.
Yeah.
From Miss D.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any research protocol or ethics in doing systematic review? For example, accessing literature resources. What do you think and your explanation?
Yeah, so there's no, obviously whenever we conduct any research, we should get ethical approval from our institution, our university, no matter whether it's primary or secondary data that we're collecting, it's good practice. But overarchingly, because this is already information that is out there and we're merely collating the evidence, there is no major ethical issues involved. In relation to accessing the literature, unfortunately, some literature is still behind paywalls. So, you know, you have to subscribe to journals to access their full texts. But there is more open access journals now, and more open access research, which is great. So there should be more available for researchers to access without barriers there. So with accessing the literature as well, you know, it's very important if you do have any issues to like speak to librarians or experts in the field of accessing these things, because usually they can definitely help you.
Yeah, thank you. We are waiting for others' questions. You may ask Erin directly, or you can put your question. Okay. Yeah. When we while we are waiting for another question, Erin, I would like to ask a question whether this kind of method is also applied a mixed method, something like that. I mean, qualitative and quantitative.
Yeah, so you can include both quantitative and qualitative studies in a systematic review, and when you're writing the research synthesis, so when you're writing up the results, you can just kind of have two sections. So one section for quantitative studies that have been included, and then qualitative, and then in your discussion you can critically think, do these complement each other? Or are they completely different because they're two different methodologies? So yeah, you can be very inclusive in a systematic review. It's also okay if you just want to look at quantitative studies, and even within that, it's okay if you're looking at quantitative studies that you want to look at a particular method. So if you want to look at like experiments or trials specifically, that's okay too, as long as it's in your inclusion and exclusion criteria. And so there's lots of flexibility in the type of studies that you can include.
Okay, so it is flexible, eh?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it can suit the research question that you pick, and the type of evidence that you're interested in, if it's quantitative, qualitative, or both. Be very inclusive.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Erin.
No problem.
Okay. If you don't mind, I will invite the participants using Indonesian bahasa.
Yeah.
Baik, dipersilakan untuk yang ingin bertanya. Ini pembahasannya sangat menarik ya. Memang agak rumit sedikit, tapi sangat menantang dan sangat menarik. Silakan.
Okay, Bu Arsi, I have a questions to Erin.
Okay, yes. Please, Ibu Dina.
Okay, I am interested with the first or two, the second or the first slides regarding the benefits of systematic review research. So to my understanding, so the benefits that you have explained, so it's based on our personal judgment, right? So how then to make our judgment about the benefits of our research becomes good, or let's say be accepted by readers of our research articles, or the claim, how to make the claims of the benefits, I don't know the exact term, good or acceptable,
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Okay.
So when you conduct, you have an idea in your head that, I think maybe a systematic review would be very useful here because I think there's a gap, or there's lots of evidence out there, but nobody has pulled it all together to say, well, what is the consensus, on this topic in the field? So, you can do some preliminary searches in the literature before conducting a systematic review to see if there are studies out there, what the gap is, like you would do a literature search for any research. And then it's really about, when you're putting together your systematic review, having justifications, for why you think it's important. So, there is research out there, but there's a gap in synthesizing it, or there's a gap in looking at it this way. So, this review helps fill that gap. Something like that there. Of course, all research in some way is subjective, isn't it, to what we think is important and what we think the gap is. So it's just trying to embed what we're interested in justifications, and if there is a gap there. Because it's fine if there is, it's great actually if there's research out there and we want to do a systematic review because we need the studies to be included. So yeah, that I think it's just thinking about those questions that I put up and being critical, you know, being like, okay, there are studies out there. Would a systematic review be helpful here to pull it all together? And it's okay as well if you do a systematic review and, you know, you put together all the results and you're left with questions. You're like, that's great, but none of the studies that have been included have thought about this or this. That's great too, because you can include that, you know, and you're informing future research. So there are lots of different ways. It doesn't just have to be, here's the consensus in the field, full stop. It can be, this is what studies have found, but we need to know this, this, and this, you know? So it can provide nearly a nice opening for your own future work as well.
Okay. So we need to read a lot and be critical. Yeah, Erin.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the answer.
Okay, thank you, Ibu Dina. Yeah. Erin, you have two questions.
Okay.
First one is from, three, from Nina. The first question is from Nina.
Mm-hmm.
She wants to know, she wants to know about what the meaning of gray literature in recommendation for best practice.
Okay, so literature is kind of known in two ways. We have our literature, like our peer-reviewed journal articles or our books, which, you know, we know that have went through a rigorous peer-reviewed, well, journal articles have went through a rigorous peer-reviewed process before they're published. But there is also lots of literature out there, lots of evidence that are maybe government reports or like charities, third sector organisations reports, students' dissertations or PhD theses, all that provide evidence on a particular topic, but mightn't have necessarily went through such a rigorous peer review process as what academic journals provide. So that is known as grey literature. Okay, so things that aren't the peer-reviewed academic journal articles or the books, you know, it's the students' theses, the dissertations, the reports. That's what we call grey literature. And by including those, excuse me, in the systematic review, you're being inclusive of all different types of evidence. So it's not just the ones that have been published in journals. And that's due to the risk of bias in like publication bias or selection bias that we can see. It's being inclusive of the evidence so that when we provide a synthesis, it includes the overall evidence on the topic.
Okay, thank you. Another one from Henry Prabowo. Okay, may you give us some tips in formulating refined research question? And also why year publication may affect systematic review?
Okay, so tips on formulating a research question. So you want to be specific about what you are interested in looking at in your research question, okay? So think of the PICOs or PICO even, you know, so think about the population that you're interested in, okay? Is it a particular age? Is it a particular grade at school? Think about the outcomes that you're interested in. So is it attainment? Is it, you know, confidence or motivation in education? Any comparators that you're interested in? So does outcome differ according to, you know, gender or anything else that you can, demographic that you can think of? So for example, in a systematic review that I conducted whilst doing my PhD, the question was looking at the influence of gender and social class. So my comparators were gender and social class on PISA attainment. So that was the outcome for pupils aged 16. So that was the population in the UK. Okay, so that was study design and context there. So it's just trying to include the key information in your research question, that when a reader picks it up, they understand exactly what you're going to be looking at in your research question. But equally, you don't want a research question that's too long. So try and keep it simple, because you can always talk about it and discuss it further in your review when you're writing it up. I hope that's helpful. The second question, why your publication may affect systematic review. So it only affects it in the studies that will be eligible for inclusion. So if you don't mind if a study was conducted in like 1990, that's okay if you want to include all research evidence. But usually there is a lot of there's a lot of results that come back when we screen the literature. So it's just a good way of trying to keep that in a manageable number for screening at title and abstract. So if you maybe just want to look at the last number of years, again, you can justify in your systematic review why you want to do that. So if maybe there's been a lot of advancements in a particular method that you're interested in looking at, or maybe there's been, a change in policy in the last 10 years in the context that you're interested in, and that's what you really want to focus on, then there's no point in looking at studies that predate that. So it's just trying to be strategic that way, and also keeping it manageable for yourself. I hope that answers your question, Henny.
Okay, thank you, Erin. We go to the next question because we have a very limited time. Okay, yes, Erin, from the 10 steps you mentioned and you described, can we conduct or pick one, or can we do that randomly, or should be in order from step 10?
Yeah, usually in order. And once you go to conduct a systematic review, it's quite systematic. So usually that's the way you do it. So yes, but of course there is some flexibility, but yes, should be in order.
Okay, right. Systematic means systematic, orderly, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then from Nisa, she's still confused about key area. Evidence quality as a key area. Okay, what do you mean? Whether it includes many numbers of sources?
Yeah.
Or what does these terms mean?
Yeah, so that's just really being critically evaluating the studies that you have included in the review. So it's just critically evaluating the method that they've used, maybe the sample size, how they have presented their results. Have they provided high quality evidence, or are there some information that's missing that, kind of affects the quality of the evidence? So for example, have they not provided any information on missing data or missing sample, and how might that affect the evidence quality? So that it's kind of just, it's thinking critically about the studies that we have included, like we do with all studies in a review, and just think, what were the limitations, and did this affect the quality of the study overall?
Okay. The last question. Okay. Is there any fixed number of publication? Should be more than 50 or 100? Okay, so Miss D asked you whether any exact numbers. 50,
okay.
100, 1,000?
Is that to be included in the systematic review? If so, there is no set number on the amount of studies you need. When we screen the literature, we can get a lot of studies that come back and that we have to screen, which is why it's important to have our refined research question and inclusion criteria. It's also important to do a systematic review if you know that there are studies out there on the topic. If there's not many, if there's only one or two, you can question how appropriate as a systematic review to be, but there is no set number. There's no minimum number and there's no maximum number. It's what can you do within the time frame that you have is important.
Okay, so do you mind for another one question more? Okay.
Of course.
From Bayu Muna Nabila. Okay. I want to ask, is there or are there any difficulties you have when using systematic reviews, and how do you deal with it? Okay. Stay healthy, Erin.
Thank you. Thank you, you too. Thank you for your question. So yes, there are difficulties in that, you know, some studies, their quality is maybe lower, so they maybe don't include important information. So for example, about the number of people that were included in their study, or maybe some key statistics, missing data, what their method was. They don't go into a lot of detail. So that's all really important information to include in your systematic review when you're comparing studies. And that can be a difficulty. And if you contact the author, that's great to do. And if they respond to you, that's even better. But sometimes authors are very busy and, you know, they don't get around to your email in time within the time frame of your systematic review. And that can be difficult because the study might have been eligible for inclusion if they had got back to you with this information, but you might then have to exclude studies due to the lack of information. So that is a key limitation. They can also be quite time consuming if you have quite a wide focus of your systematic review when you're screening the results, but it is worth it. So the benefits are also very good. So just make sure that you account for maybe contacting authors and following up emails for a week or two, and also give yourself enough time to screen and extract the data, especially if you have quite a few studies. You never know how many studies are going to be included in your systematic review.
Okay, thank you, Erin. Yeah, the time is also okay. Yes, thank you so much. Stay safe and healthy. You also, same by you. Okay, Budina, I think the time is
yeah, the time is up. It's
okay.
it's 4 already here. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Erin, for today's discussion. I would like to give a brief, what is it, not summary, but because we still continue until tomorrow, Erin, yeah. But what we have discussed today is that systematic review is talking about the evidence of practice, right? I mean, the evidence of practice means that how we provide the data from empirical evidence, okay, taken from the eligible or accurate sources, okay, and this method is trying to answer specific information and also to minimize what is errors, okay. So I think this is very beneficial approach or method for us, especially in education. Okay, so in Bahasa, I would like to give a very brief review for today's discussion, bahwa metodologi ini bukan metode yang baru, ya sudah banyak digunakan, tapi mungkin belum banyak digunakan oleh kita, dan manfaatnya sangat luar biasa karena bisa capturing atau atau menghadirkan satu peristiwa atau fenomena dari rangkaian peristiwa-peristiwa terdahulu. Yang tadi Erin bicarakan di sini ada banyak tips dan strategi, termasuk juga 10 steps-nya ya. Mungkin Erin akan mulai mempraktekkan atau mengimplementasikan langsung step-step tersebut untuk esok hari ya. Dan kita bisa memulai melakukan penelitian ya dengan menggunakan systematic review ini. Oke, Erin, can I ask your plan for tomorrow, Erin?
Yes, of course. So tomorrow is our second seminar at the same time. So what I'm going to do tomorrow is I'm going to go through, each step that I have went through today, and I'm going to provide a practical example of a systematic review that I was involved in with my colleagues in its statistics self-concept amongst math students at university. So I'm going to go step by step through each step that we went through today and provide examples from that systematic review of how we formulated our research question or our search string, and discuss that to show you how these theoretical steps work in practice. I'll also leave enough time, I'll leave more time for discussion because of course after a day of thinking about this, some more questions might come up. So I'll leave time for discussion and also just think practically about how systematic reviews can differ when we're writing about evidence as well. So I hope that sounds okay. So it might be a bit of a recap in relation to the steps, but it'll show how they practically work on a systematic review, which hopefully will be very helpful.
Okay, so the audience and participants, tomorrow Erin will give some practical examples. Okay, I'm sure that some of them are taken from your research, your current research about systematic review. Jadi besok Miss Erin, Dr. Erin akan melakukan menghadirkan contoh-contoh ya penelitian-penelitian seputar seputar systematic review ini dan akan dipandu satu-satu berdasarkan step-step yang sudah dibahas hari ini. Okay, yeah. Thank you, Erin, for today. I'm very happy to see you, and I hope tomorrow we can meet again and share the discussion, also your findings in your current research. Okay, thank you for everyone. Thank you for participants. And for a materi presentasi, I don't know whether International Office can provide it or no. You can answer the question, Ibu Dina. Okay. Okay. So everyone, see you again tomorrow. Stay safe and healthy. Thank you.
Bu Arsi, but before we end our session, so we would like to have a photo session first as a documentations for documentations. So I request all the participants to activate the video so that you can post, give your best smile, okay? Okay, Nugi, are you ready? Okay, okay. Okay, it's done. Thank you very much, Erin, for a very insightful explanation.
Thank you, Erin.
Thank you, Ibu Siti Suharti. Okay. Okay.
I'm hiding.
So the participants can leave the Zoom room. Okay. Bye. See you tomorrow.
Right. See you tomorrow. Thank you very much, everyone. Erin, thank you, and see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. Good to see you.
I was hiding. All right.
Thank
see you.
You.
See you. Bye-bye. Bu Arsi, thank you ya. See you tomorrow, Bu Arsi.
You're welcome. Okay.
Thank you, Bapak Ibu.
Right. Thank you, everyone.
See you all tomorrow.
Yeah, see you tomorrow.
Good to see you all.
Yeah.
Kira materinya bisa di-share atau tidak ya, Pak Panitia, Bu Panitia?